Traditional medicine is no longer the only option available. An advanced approach to healthcare now leverages information about a person's genes, proteins, environment, and lifestyle to prevent, identify, and treat disease more effectively. Our guest today is a board certified family physician, author, and CEO and founder of the Institute for Human Optimization. He's also a personal friend and joins us to explore these cutting edge medical options and share how you can achieve your optimal state of health and vitality. This is the story of precision medicine with Dr. Anil Bajnath. Dr. Anil, great to have you on. It's been too long.
It's a pleasure. It's truly a pleasure. It's like I'm seeing a long lost family relative here that I haven't seen in about 6, 7 years since we
It's
last
been
had
that
a
long, and it's been over a decade since we first were introduced all those years back when we were doing seminars in the New Yorker and Manhattan. You showed up, and I remember being like, what is a young MD doing here? Because, you usually get people that have already been down the road for a while and searching for something new, but you were still, as we were saying, a little bit brainwashed at the time through conventional medicine. But your path is one that I always admired because you aren't just, hey, I went to medical school and I practiced medicine. You went down so many different rabbit holes. You did so much more than just medical school. You continue to do that. Can you talk a little bit about that, just your path and your story of like where you started to where you are now? Because it's really fascinating.
And honestly, I feel as though that when we finally connected, back in like 2014-ish,
Yep.
via Ashley Solomon was the one that
Yeah.
really turned me on to innovative medicine and what she was learning. It was very refreshing because my kind of trajectory throughout medicine and healthcare started when I was a teenager. So when I
Mm,
was 16 years old, I was working at a Whole Foods market, selling nutraceuticals and supplements, and learning about homeopathic medicine, herbal medicine, nutrition, all the fun stuff. I was learning from like Michael Murray, the author of the textbook for an encyclopedia for natural medicine. He's a big guy. And
mm,
I was meeting all these amazing innovators in the integrative medicine space. Andrew Weil and Udo Erasmus, fats that heal, fats that kill, and he did a lot of lipid research. And so, from a young age, I was really influenced by this approach to kind of healing, right? And correcting these imbalances within the system and providing the body with the appropriate tools and resources needed to kind of function properly. And then, in undergrad, doing molecular microbiology and medical laboratory science and getting that appreciation of the nutritional biochemistry associated with things, you realize that we're just a giant bag of, ions that are functioning based on, pH perturbations, salts, fats, lipids, sugars, all sorts of fun things. And it's creating that balance within. But as a teenager, one of the things that I really got into was dark field phase contrast microscopy.
mm. Yes.
By It was introduced to me by my high school wrestling coach, one of them, and he knew that I was working at Whole Foods and selling supplements, really into that. And this was a gentleman that was a biohacker before biohacking was coined a term.
Yep.
And he was really into rife technology and frequencies and all this other stuff. And he's like, "Hey, take a look at this dark field phase contrast microscope." And there's levels of application that could be associated with nutrition. It might be something you're interested in. And it was. So at the age of 19, I flew out, right at, 18, 19 transition to Chicago to biomedics in Illinois, and got trained and certified in a technique using dark field phase contrast microscopy. And I'm like, oh, this is amazing. One drop of blood, you're able to identify all sorts of morphological variances within the blood that go beyond a standard CBC, right? And, so I thought at that time I wanted to become a hematopathologist, right? And, until I worked at MD Anderson Cancer Center in undergrad when I was doing my medical laboratory science with some of those docs and realized, oh man, these guys are just lab rats that have very poor interpersonal communication skills. And this is not fun. So I went on to study a bunch, and formalizing this kind of integrative approach to microscopy with the formalization with, the molecular microbiology, medical laboratory science. I trained at that time with a mutual colleague of ours, Dr. Thomas Rao, and did the
Mm,
Paracelsus Clinic training while I was in undergrad. in all these different European biological techniques. And as we were discussing earlier, that some of these resources are no longer available here in the U.S. So
Right.
there's a whole system of medicine that's available out in Europe that we just don't have access to. And it doesn't make sense to me as a provider because it's just like, all right, if it doesn't work and it's just placebo because homeopathic medicine's bullshit, then why is it banned? Why can't we get it? Right? If it's just sugar water. All right. So to me, there's a lot of things that just don't make sense. So I did a lot of stuff with Peter Diadamo as well, the author of the Genotype Diet and Eat Right for Your Blood Type. And from an immunohematological perspective, the lectin chemistry really resonated with me. Do I think it's a holy grail? No, but I do think that, there is, various factors that influence those adhesion molecules and binding and complement activation. So to me, from a scientific perspective, there was some evidence and information there that made sense in the personalization of medicine. So, yeah, fast forward, went to med school, right? Got brainwashed over the years. And I met Dr. Ashley Solomon when I was at I think, IFM conference in Arizona. I was doing the ASAP, Applying Functional Medicine to Clinical Practice conference in 2014, and she was studying with you and with innovative medicine. And it was the first time in about 5 years, 4 to 5 years, that I got reintroduced to European biological medicine. And I'm telling you, I was so excited because, going through everything that I just went through with conventional medicine and training, before starting residency and getting this refresher returned me to my roots of my passion and interest. And how do we, provide people with the appropriate tools to heal, right? So that's when we got connected and I started studying with you. Oh my gosh, 10 years now,
Yeah.
almost over 10
Flies
years,
by.
you know? And so for me personally, I feel as though what you guys have provided is an additional layer of information diagnostics that just go beyond what I think conventional medicine is ready to even understand or process. So in regards to bioresonance and so forth. But yeah, so that's kind of my journey. I went to residency at University of Maryland, completed my training there, and I'm faculty at George Washington University where I teach for the integrative medicine master's degree. And basically, the courses that I teach are essentially the fellowship through the A4M, the American Academy for Anti-Aging Medicine. I created my private practice centered around one of the classes that I teach, the omics of medicine,
Mm.
INTM 6205, and looking at how we could connect the molecular dots from genome to phenome, and looking at all the different factors, including your exposome and environment, and even utilization of transcriptomics and looking at DNA, expression and how it's influencing kind of, protein synthesis and signaling, metabolomics, but looking at all these different molecular signals and inputs that are influencing, the pathophenotype of an individual, right? So, with that being said, that's what I do here in my private practice is, I genotype everybody. I'm looking at all the different, kind of conventional diagnostic tests that are accepted, amongst my peers and community. And that's where I think, the bulk of my private practice here are physicians because they understand what I'm trying to do. I mean, I have old school docs from Hopkins that are like, just overzealous once we have these conversations about longevity and health optimization and how we're looking at, unpacking this information and using it to create and curate customized roadmap towards longevity. And that led me to, write my book, The Longevity Equation, right? Which is going to be hopefully out here soon. This is a preprint release. I'm still making some edits to it, but it's one of those things that in my mind, it's never going to be done. There's always new research and information that I'm trying to infuse in there, and need to get over that hump of trying to perfect it.
You're a
But yeah, I mean,
perfectionist like
the
me. I
question.
get it.
Well, you're the man, Caspar. I'm telling you, I
I
just love
appreciate
everything
that.
that you're doing. And honestly, I'm just really appreciative for your friendship over the years and your guidance from your father and you and your network, from, Dr. Solomon and Beth McDougall and, Dr. Vickers and all Ian Morrison and all these guys that are a part of this close knit kind of network here.
Well, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that, Neil. You really do have this extraordinary journey, and I've always admired it. There are very few. I've traveled the world. I've met so many different doctors. There are very few young doctors and practitioners out there that I find aren't just truth seekers like you, meaning going out, always exploring what's new, being open-minded. Like you said, I think Ashley Solomon is one, Kuba Brill, young, brilliant guy yourself, or in that are always never stopping at one thing and saying, that's it, we found the key to everything, right? Because you find those and then you just find they just go down that one route. It's this one little molecule and that's the key to everything I do. No, you guys are open, but then you're also artists within that. You're taking what you learn and applying that within your own ways that are truly a craft. And you've gotten to this point where you've gotten to something you've labeled precision medicine. So, can you tell us how you were able to take all these different tools, solutions, ideas, and come up with this precision medicine approach?
And I think a lot of this stems with just the organizational construct of
Yeah,
how things are kind of grouped together here. And by definition, the NIH defines precision medicine as the interface of lifestyle, environment, and biology. And to me, that just sounds like really good medicine,
yeah.
precision, integrative, functional, whatever you want to call it, right? And having that molecular background and teaching the omics really kind of led me down this road of like thinking along these lines of we could measure this stuff, and theoretically you can't manage what you don't measure, and furthermore, there's I was at a University of Pennsylvania at a multi-omic conference in precision medicine a few months ago, last year sometime, and I went up to the director, and after witnessing all these amazing MD, PhD researchers presenting on their amazing science and whatever they're doing, and I said, "Hey, this is wonderful, but this is still isolated in silos. Even though it's precision,
Mhm.
that's segregated, that it with the intention of trying to find the magic bullet for a drug." And I'm
Right.
like, that's cool, right? But there's other clinical applications that we could have using this precision medicine landscape and format that could be used to personalize healthcare. So I told the director at UPenn, this is what I do in my practice. And they're like, what? You could do all this testing, right? And I said, yeah, and believe it or not, Medicare pays for some of them,
Mhm.
and so they were really impressed by that. And I came home and I was like, all right, I'm teaching this class or all these classes. And all these major academic institutions are having their centers for precision medicine. University of Pittsburgh, Stanford, Mayo, all these prestigious, kind of centers of excellence, but everybody, they're not talking. It's still that same
Yes.
rigmarole framework of allopathic, pill for ill, reductionistic kind of processing. That's with the goal of let's find that magic bullet, and they're
Mhm.
missing the big picture of all of this. So for me, I came back and I started the American Board of Precision Medicine. We're a 501(c), and we're in our infancy, and we've recruited some of the amazing faculty from around the country at major academic institutions that is providing content and training for us. And we're with the goal and intention of graduating our first cohort here, hopefully within the next 6 to 12 months, of precision medicine physicians that are able to use this framework of understanding and drive innovation. Because the reality is, when you go to your doctor and my insurance doesn't pay for this test, it's bullshit, right? That, first of all, like the whole CBC, CMP, and all that other stuff is hospital-based medicine that is only going to determine if you're going to live or die, right? There's so
Right.
much more information, and we need to push innovation from the medical laboratory side of things so that we could adopt this multi-omic kind of diagnostic approach, right? And for me personally, most people will say, well, what about the promise of genetics, right? Is that still there? Is this still going to hold, true for being so deterministic in regards to health and health outcomes? And I'm going to say no. I really do believe that 20% of your health information is going to be kind of custom or derived from your book of life, your genetic blueprint. But the
Mhm.
other 80 to 90% is going to be based on the environmental signals and inputs influencing epigenetic gene expression, right? So it's one, there's forgot the researcher that said this, but it's a a generic term that's thrown around, but genetics is loading the gun, but the environment's pulling the trigger, right?
Yeah.
That's common phrase within precision medicine. And I think
Yeah.
that how I leverage genomics, for example, is not in this context of determinism, genetic determinism, but more so empowerment, and of how we use this information to further identify potential patterns of, predisposition and vulnerability or weaknesses, right? And oftentimes you could see certain things that track, right? Whether it's dyslipidemia and identifying a cluster of genes that influences hypercholesterol, or LP little a or ApoB, and all these different genes that influence kind of, okay, your environmental susceptibility to dietetic kind of factors, right? So you see that there's a lot of talk about ApoE, right, in regards to Alzheimer's and those genetic predispositions. So for me personally, I use this information for empowerment, not to stress anybody. And I use it in the context of what's called polygenic risk scores, looking at a cluster of genes that influence a specific, phenotype, and kind of uncode that, a little bit further at looking at kind of some of the nuances of what, how those genes influence some key regulatory biochemical pathways and maybe even some disease dysfunction. So with that being said, I love looking at genomics and unpacking that. And for a lot of my patients, once we go through this, I'm basically explaining them to themselves. I'm like, hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
do you experience this and that and the other? And they're like, oh my gosh, of course, from rotator cuff issues, tendon issues to neurological issues and certain, kind of behavioral things that are identified due to some of these genetic kind of imprinting, So it's very interesting, and I like to have fun with it.
Oh
So
no, it's super interesting, and it is great that you are connecting all these molecular dots. And when you look at those dots, the data points that you're looking at, right? Because a lot of people, I think, when they think about dots, they're thinking about, oh, what lab tests are you running and what dots are those? But it goes beyond just the, let's say, functional labs and the normal labs. You're looking at genomic, proteomic, metabolomic data. And that's where it gets really interesting, but also somewhat confusing to the layman that's like, what is that, right? What is that?
yeah.
My triglyceride reading like that I'm used to just seeing and all this and that. It's further molecular dots. Can you talk about the differences, maybe just in those three? I mean, I've heard those terms. I know how some are using. I'd love to know how you're using those data points and connecting the dots.
Yeah, happy to. So, essentially, we just went over genetics, right, and genomics and varying levels of clinical application. One thing I did neglect that's leading the charge of precision medicine is pharmacogenomics and looking at, who's going to respond to what drug based on what and how and dosing and so forth. And that has to deal with like cytochrome P450s in the liver and the rate of metabolism. Some people are fast metabolizers, slow metabolizers, and that influences, your receptivity to intervention or that has those metabolic kind of pathways. But speaking forward, going back to the central dogma of biology, which is DNA into RNA, RNA into protein, essentially DNA codes for genes and genes code for proteins, right? And then proteins are, these structures in the body that give rise to structure and function. And then all of a sudden you have proteins that give rise to enzymes, and enzymes give rise to metabolism, and metabolism gives rise to physiological function. So it's building off on that narrative where, there's various levels of proteomic signaling based on, just the signals and inputs that we're feeding our body. So for example, if you eat a standard American diet and it's just loaded in like high fat processed oils and all the bad stuff, right? Or glyphosate or all these other environmental toxicants that we're exposed to, what's going to happen? You're going to drive up these inflammatory signals like nuclear factor kappa beta, right? And you're going to have all these other inflammatory signals that are upregulated on a transcriptomic level, that's coding for these proteins that are pro-inflammatory, right? So I do believe from a proteomic standpoint that, and I've spoken to some of the top researchers around the world on this. From a proteomic standpoint, you can measure all these freaking proteins in the world. So you're, you could just measure so much, right?
Right.
Hundreds, thousands proteins. So what? That's great. Tell me what's the end? What am I going to do about that? Right? Because at the end of the day, there's going to be, I think, four key kind of phenotypes associated with perturbations within the homeodynamic regulation. And that's going to be inflammation, oxidation, ischemia, and immune dysregulation, right? That's what I see clinically all friggin' day, right?
Mhm.
Is oxidation,
Yep.
inflammation, ischemia, and immune dysregulation. And if there's another kind of proteomic deviation, I would love to hear about it and unpack that further. But for me, that's what I see clinically day in and day out. So proteins, we can measure all sorts of different proteomics within the system. And that's going a little bit deeper. And you can even do this with LabCorp and Quest by going into the lipidology and looking at LPA and LPPLA2, ApoB, fraction size and all that fun stuff from that perspective. You could look at homocysteine and, as an indirect reflection of the MTHFR gene and how that influences, folic acid utilization. You could look at, there's what is it, the beta amyloid 42/40 ratio in regards to accumulation of some of these misfolded proteins in the system. Right. So there are different levels of proteomics that you could go into, right, to get a better appreciation of what's going on and translating this information from genome to phenome. So that's the proteomic kind of dynamics that I do clinically. And then in regards to metabolomics, well, again, proteins give rise to enzymes, enzymes give rise to metabolism, metabolism gives rise to function. So the metabolomics of this is now looking at, deeper kind of complexes of where we could identify any perturbations within the system or the cellular function and physiology due to maybe toxicity or deficiencies, right? So identifying any of these potential toxicants that interfere with these enzymes that are involved with like metabolism and function, cellular respiration, whatever it is, we could identify that, right? And I actually have tracked it both on a transcriptomic level, right, and a metabolomic level, and they're telling us the same thing. And it
Mhm.
goes back to basically saying, hey, there are these various factors in our environment that influence our ability to have normal function, right? So in my one of my practices through the university, I work with Dr. Andrew Heyman, who's the director at A4M, really big researcher in the field of chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS. And in our practice, we use a test called Genie, and Genie is a transcriptomic test. And so if you were to imagine your DNA being the instruments to your own personal symphony orchestra, the transcriptome is measuring the melody coming off that gene, right? So are certain instruments playing too loud and upregulated, or certain instruments playing too low and downregulated, right? And what we end up ultimately seeing is this molecular signature that's very consistent with, various levels of environmental stressors, whether it's infection, Lyme disease, co-infection, chronic viral issues. We see the molecular signature of cell danger response based on the research of Dr. Robert Navinow. And essentially, when your cells perceive danger, it responds by conserving energy and downregulates your mitochondrial large and small subunits and translocase and ATP synthase. And that's why you feel like shit, right? Because those genes your cells are perceiving stress. It's downregulating. It's taking on this defensive posturing, and it's conserving energy, right? Because of that threat in the environment, right?
Yeah.
We also do research around the FKBP5 gene, which is associated with PTSD, and we see that in a lot of individuals. So it's very interesting looking at things from that transcriptomic level. And then, if you do a metabolomic testing, right, you're able to see a very similar pattern of mitochondrial dysfunction due to CDR, cell danger response, or biotoxin related illness, or infection, or, your immune system can't keep up with the pace of immunological surveillance because it's so inundated with noise, coming in from all the different environmental threats, whatever that might be, right? Environmentally. So there's just so many different factors there that we're able to kind of pinpoint, that influences your phenotype. And when I had a call with the NIH the other day, the director of exposomics, and I told him what we're doing with the American board, he was like, holy shit, this is incredible. Like we want to support you. And
Yeah.
because it is the future of medicine.
Well, it's so many more dots and data points that answer the question, why do I feel like shit, that we're just missing a lot within conventional medicine of guessing and just putting a diagnosis to it without understanding the why. And you don't stop at just those data points. I mean, you're looking at dark field microscopy. I see that in the background. You're looking at various ways to start to understand the why I feel like shit. And when you get that answer, treatments becomes very precise and personalized.
Mhm.
And we talked about this before, this idea, and you've had it for a while, and I love it. You look at it through a three Q perspective. And could you touch on that just a little bit? Because I really feel it's the most comprehensive way of looking at a patient and what medicine should be doing.
Well, and I gotta thank you for this too, for opening up the horizon of for me to kind of come up with this narrative of Q3 medicine. And it stands for quantitative, qualitative, and quantumtative. I know quantumtative is not a word, I made it up, but whatever.
No one
I
cares. It sounds good.
it sounds good, right? It fits the narrative, right? So long story short, I feel as though that we could, quantify things through blood in regards to a CBC, right? And get some parameters of how big or small your red blood cell is and how many white blood cells you have and do a diff and all that other fun stuff. But it means very little to the patient that's trying to optimize their health, right? Versus maybe what you could see behind me, a drop of blood, I don't that has, you could see some of these little cells with little spikes on it, right?
Yeah.
And that could be indicative of increased membrane lipid peroxidation and free radical damage and everything else. And that's a qualitative reflection of
Mhm.
the blood. And this is a lost art, looking at blood under the microscope. Historically, when doctors would go to the hospital and make their rounds, they would actually have to go to the lab, prepare their own slides, do a diff, and do their own counts historically and look under the microscope of the blood and find the acanthocytes, echonocytes, poikilocytes, whatever it is. And they would be able to use that clinically to say, hey, there's a little bit of, stress in the liver or kidneys and free radical damage and so forth. That's no longer a part of the narrative in medicine and healthcare. And then on the quantum side, and this is where, again, I think that we are, in a safe space here, and I don't think that, a lot of allopaths have really embraced this level of processing and this departure from Newtonian physics that we all have to go through in order to get to med school, as we got to, learn how quickly that rock is going to roll down the hill at what pace and trajectory and all that other fun stuff. But it's missing that quantum leap in healthcare, which I feel as though, some of the things that you do with innovative medicine really explores a little bit deeper and with more precision. And I think right now that's quantum association, I think, is going to take into account the field that we do not have a tangible way of always being able to kind of measure and identify.
Yeah.
And I know there have been studies around, measuring subatomic particles and being able the mirroring behind that and the string theory and all of that other stuff. But applying that to medicine is a whole nother
Oh,
great leap, right?
it's
But
it's it's totally yeah, that really is a true quantum leap of just changing your whole mindset to get there, and that's difficult. I know that for my father and others it was. You're
oh
trained
yeah,
in one way, you got to completely kind of not disregard again. That's where people I think get it wrong, Neil, is they think they need to disregard what they've learned and, relearn everything. No, you're adding on to it. And that's why the 3Q like that made sense. It's not either or. It's not, and people think this way. I know this. Like some practitioners, like energy medicine is the future. I agree, but it's not like physical medicine is suddenly gone. Like we have to forget about it, and if the broken leg will suddenly we'll put it into a PEMF machine, and overnight it'll be better. You still got to
yeah,
set it, go through the physicality of it. So
yeah.
it's not neither or, and that's why I love what you're doing and your approach is it is comprehensive, it is collaborative, and it is bringing things together. But we live in a world that is so specialized, right? Medicine is going down further specialties, and it's not just the conventional side. I won't just single them out because it is the alternative, the integrative side. It's the ability of a practitioner to only study one little facet of something that is considered alternative and say, this is my solution to help the patient, when we know that's the same thing as, going to a specialist that only does certain surgeries, and you may not require that surgery. They're going to want to do that surgery on you anyway.
And that's what's happening right now in precision medicine. Everybody's going through their little silos of segregation and staying in their their lanes and missing the big picture of the interconnectedness and the network analysis that's associated with all the different kind of signals and inputs or Zeitgerbers or these different environmental cues that are influencing our gene expression through clock genes and how that's influencing our circadian rhythms and biology as a whole. And that refers back to the Nobel Prize a few years ago for I think five researchers, American researchers, that really unpacked these clock genes and how they're heavily influenced by these different environmental signals and cues. So I think that when it comes down to it, yeah, medicine could continue to go down the hyper specialization road, and I think it's needed,
Yeah.
right? Because God forbid, there's an issue, whatever that issue might be. You want that specialist.
Hmm.
You want that, right? But the thing is, we all need to play nicely in the sandbox and embrace one another and be open to the emerging kind of concepts philosophically of this ever evolving landscape of medicine, right? Philosophically. And I do think that there's a lot of factors to it, but when it comes down to it, I'm not anti-specialists, right? Because God forbid somebody has like a stroke, right? I was just on a call with a vascular surgeon not too long ago, and we were
Hmm.
talking about some of the things that I've identified and I've seen on a molecular level that is accelerating vascular dementia, right? And
Hmm.
I said, hey, we are looking at the genes that are associated with coagulation and tubulin formation, and this is could be further quantified through neuroquant imaging, that we're seeing these patterns of nuclear atrophy within specific regions of the brain associated with levels of infection and illness, and then there's a vascular component to it. And we had an amazing talk about his experience, being a vascular neurologist, and his levels of clinical application. And it's just like it's amazing. So everybody has their role within healthcare, right? And it's just being able to speak and share the same language, right? And that's where I think precision medicine does come into play, where, in medical school, we're still taught, genetics, we're still taught, there's RNA and, there's proteins and metabolism, but we're not taught how to leverage this information in the personalization of healthcare. It's still this one size fits all kind of narrative of like, oh, pill for ill, do this if you got that. And it's removing all the other compounding variables influencing, the phenotypical expression, who this
Yeah, and you
person
make a
is.
good point that we don't need to suddenly get rid of specialties and everyone just go into trying to learn everything there is in the medical spectrum. That's not realistic, and I agree that's not even beneficial. It is about changing the mindset within the specialties, that it isn't
Yeah,
a pill for the ill, that we aren't just managing disease, but that we're working together in our specialties to provide solutions that actually bring about healing and actually
exactly.
bringing about the optimization of our body, mind, and spirit. And
Oh
that
yeah.
alone will guide specialties to becoming more aware of what those solutions may be within their specialized way of thinking, right? So
Oh
I
yeah.
think the answer isn't about changing the system, it's about changing the way the system thinks about what healing is. If you believe healing is the subsiding of symptoms only, well then we have a very different definition of what healing is, because the disease persists, the symptoms are just kind of pushed away. It's painting over the leak in the wall instead of addressing the leak on the pipe behind it. And that's where
Exactly.
things need to change. That's, I know, where you've been looking at for a while now. As someone that is a person that's absorbing always from different angles and speaking to so many different people, I got to ask you, what is exciting to you right now in the medical field and healing? What are you looking at to bring on at the Institute for Human Optimization that's exciting you?
That's a great question, and thank you. I look, I'm really excited about the field of regenerative medicine. I
Mm.
really think that if we are doing things to basically optimize our longevity, right, and going through and identifying these different hallmarks of aging that are kind of our greatest threats to accelerated biological aging, and we're identifying these kind of patterns and routines, and we're able to optimize it, and then to push the envelope a little bit further to improve performance and help with regenerative capacity. That's really exciting for me. I believe you had a physician on here recently from Florida that's doing the V cells, the very small embryonic like stem
Dr.
cells.
Sienna
Uh,
Steckel, yes.
Yeah, Dr. Suckle. And I have, I'm doing V cells in my practice.
Hmm.
And some of the anecdotal kind of outcomes have been really favorable.
Hmm.
And I'm in the process right now of I like to like go and do conferences. I'm a conference junkie, as you may know.
I know.
Um, I'm all about going to the conferences, and this year I'm double booked for the IFM, Institute for Functional Medicine, and the National Lipid Association. So I'm going to be doing two conferences at once. But the good news is they're right next door to each other, Bellagio and Caesar's Palace in Vegas. So I'm actually going for my board certification in lipidology this year because I just feel as though lipidology is just one of our greatest opportunities for longevity. Because when you really start unpacking what the biggest threats to our health is, it's going to be cardiometabolic in nature, right? So
Right.
heart disease, right, being the number one killer in the US.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I'm a bad Indian, right? I should be eating chickpeas and curry, right? But I feel better with meat, right? O blood type. I have my own personal struggles with, dyslipidemia, and high cholesterol. And I've tried going vegan. It sucked. My, bench press went down 100 and something pounds and I just felt like shit. So can't do that. So, um, I have a SLOCO 1B1 polymorphism, which makes me statin intolerant, so I can't do a statin drug. But so again, looking at how do we connect these molecular dots, I'm still trying to unpack this with myself, and I'm doing some lipid exchange therapy with like plaque
Hmm.
X now to help with my own kind of struggles with atherosclerosis. So lipidology is really, I think something that's near and dear to my personal heart. And I've, trying to figure out and kind of, optimize myself with this, without going setting myself back. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is stem cells as a whole. I'm halfway finished with my board certification in stem cell medicine as a stem cell physician, and I think right now that's really exciting for me because with the Institute for Human Optimization, it's not about treating medication, right? Or treating patients and their illness. It's about how do we optimize oneself and engage in purposeful and meaningful behaviors to, just maximize our health potential. And, I'm sitting in my office here right now. On the other side of this wall is my jujitsu school, right? So for me personally, I just want to be in an environment where I'm pushing myself, physically and mentally and everything else. And I just like to, be able to train and optimize those that are around me and like-minded. We were just talking offline about some of the technologies that we're bringing in. We got the Vasper system and we're doing
Hmm.
EWAP where, I have a biocharger and we're doing all sorts of, hyperbaric oxygen therapy and all these different technologies here. And, my intention is not to invite the world in. I want to be very selective with who I'm working with so that I could optimize my community, and those who, support me as I support them, so um, those are kind of the exciting things right now is looking at how do we push the envelope in health and performance. And for me personally, I'm just trying to keep up with the college wrestler, the college wrestler. I'm 40 now, going against these young bucks is very challenging and it sucks. I just try to stay alive, when I'm grappling these guys. So for me, that's my longevity motivation. And a part of my equation is just being able to, keep up with the training and, just have access to the tools and resources, explore these regenerative modalities, look at, pushing this narrative of precision medicine because like I said, a lot of my patients are physicians and they're the ones that understand this translational process of connecting the molecular dots and how we can leverage this information for empowerment and refinement and enhancement of overall well-being.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very advantageous after a long day of treating patients to hit the BJJ spot up and tap a few younger bucks and get in some training, which of course is part of the optimization, doing things that you love, that you're passionate about, that keep you moving, keep you in this state where you aren't stagnated. Now, one of the things I know you talked about, we want to get your opinion on. Recently, you had a talk with peptides. How do you feel about peptides?
Yeah, I love peptides. I think there's a lot of therapeutic potential there. And I know that the FDA just kind of re-regulated that. And I understand where the FDA is coming from, honestly. This is where a balanced perspective is going to be like, look, there's all these people that aren't doctors, right? That are out there saying, hey, we're going to cure your COVID. And when they said that, What was pulled? Thymosin alpha 1, gone. Thymosin beta 4, gone. Why? Because it was being touted as a cure for treating an issue,
Yeah.
right? I think the language around peptides is what got it in trouble in the first place, right? You cannot say, hey, I'm going to use this peptide to treat this ailment. You can say, hey, it's going to support this physiology and this chemistry. So that's what led it to, I think, being kind of pulled. And and I also understand where the FDA is coming from because look, you got all these clinics popping up, and I know some of the doctors that are just throwing people on peptides left and right, willy-nilly, no discretion, no surveillance. They're doing all these growth hormone analogs and so forth and whatnot. And I think that's a little, reckless in my opinion. So however, it's not to say they're not beneficial. I love them. I love, CJC Ipramorelin. I love the BPC 157, the TB 500 and everything in between, and all the other fancier, more obscure peptides. I think they, for my patients, when I was able to use them a little bit more readily, the results were remarkable, but I was doing it responsibly, I think, trying
Yeah.
to, right? And not getting somebody on a stack that they're going to be on forever, and it's like knowing how to cycle on and off it, use it responsibly and in kind of in a method that's not going to get you or your patient in trouble clinically,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of recklessness out there. And I know there's a Seeds Institute, and I'm friends with Jim Lavelle, and we've had conversations around the regulatory landscape about peptides. And it's just like right now they're like, oh, there's no research. Well, there is research. It's overseas, Russia and Europe and everything else that's been using this, without negative adverse outcomes, for the most part for a very long while. But that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm very pro peptide, but used and regulated to a certain level of integrity because you're getting who knows where you're sourcing this stuff from, and you could be getting
Right.
like veterinary grade peptides that have a high amount of endotoxin or LPS that could lead to negative health outcomes, right? So there needs to be some regulation of this stuff, that to protect the public as a whole. So
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point. I'm going to shock some people that I truly believe like FDA regulation. I think we both have our thoughts on the FDA and kind of what they do as a whole. But FDA regulation is needed. I
yeah,
do find that a lot of integrative medicine has become a little bit too Wild West. And you're seeing just IV pop-ups where they're ghost doctors, basically, meaning no one's truly there. And it's just a nurse that just prescribes whatever you want, and that is the way to approach healing, and it's not. And I think it basically puts a target anyway on people that are doing good things and being artistic with it. And then things like peptides, exosomes, it's a wild west. It's a new thing. But like it reminds me of like in finance and crypto and everything, you need regulation. Like when regulation comes, it weeds out the bad characters, the SBFs, and like all these people trying to, Ponzi scheme everyone. And that's
yeah,
what we need in medicine, especially. I think on a whole, it's not just to say integrate. If it's anything new, we need those type of regulatory capacities. And that's where some people get a little bit upset. But I truly do think, in no other fields should we put, safety, quality, and all these things, the restrictions at its highest. But we can't just take them away, like you said. Then you're going to have
yeah.
Russia and Europe doing amazing things and innovative things. Just because there's access, it doesn't mean that there aren't restrictions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And look, I have a handful of patients that work at the FDA, and they'll be the first one to tell you, we don't know why this is happening.
Right.
And, key opinion and decision makers, within the FDA. My practice is here in Maryland, just outside of DC. So, I have a good amount of, government, kind of patients that have, found me through the grapevine. And they're interestingly enough the ones that are pushing the envelope that want to
Hmm.
explore some of these other off-label kind of things. So, I don't want to say too much, but I do think that yes, from a public safety standpoint, that the FDA does have its, needs to kind of come in here and make sure that there is some level of, standardization. Same thing what they did with the DSHEA Act, Dietary
Yep.
Supplement Health Education Act, right? That regulated the nutraceutical industry. Because if not, you're going to get a bunch of these guys pushing a bunch of bullshit, and
Yeah.
you see it all day. You see it all
You
day, and
do.
I'm even seeing it within the community, and it kind of upsets me, honestly, where they're
Oh
like,
yeah.
"Oh, I went to this other provider. They had me on this warrior stack, and I feel amazing. And it's like, you're probably gonna crash if you come off of that, and that's not
Mhm.
normal, it's super physiological. And did they test you for any cancer? Did you do a Grail? Did you do a full body MRI? Did you do anything beforehand? No. So just like hormones, there's all these hormone practices that pop
Yes.
up, and that are owned and operated by business people,
Yeah.
and they throw away the ethics behind everything. And I can tell you right now, in my area, there's a clinic that's gone nationwide, and it's owned by a bunch of business people, and they practice questionably on the ethical side. And
Mhm.
and with that being said, it's just one of those things that I don't. For me, I'd rather deal with ethics, quality over quantity, and make sure that we're doing really good medicine before just trying to sell you
Yeah.
something. That's it. So there is a lot of snake oil, unfortunately, in this industry, and there's a lot of bullshit. And for the consumer, they're just seeing what somebody on Instagram is saying, right? They're like,
Yeah.
oh, this post by this influencer on Instagram, it must be good. No, that person is a shithead. You should not listen to them. And they're probably disseminating more nonsense than anything else. And, I'm not saying doctors always have the answer, but, there's a lot of disinformation out there that's kind of being disseminated that's just not good. Right. And I think you see that trying to have a really balanced perspective on things, you know, and
Absolutely.
I just don't get behind all the hype, right? So I hope that
Well,
answered.
I think we both agree that there is no silver bullet. You can be absolutely excited about new things that come out. You can experience things and say, this helped me. I think
Right.
then, but there is this idea that this is the answer to everything that ails you is no different than what conventional medicine has been espousing for so long, but obviously is not because we're sicker than ever. I think we
Yeah.
have to take a logical standpoint that each of us are so uniquely different, and there are wonderful solutions out there, but we have to use and kind of lean on the education, the knowledge base, the wisdom, the artistry of practitioners such as yourself to help us to understand and weed through all the bullshit that is out there. Because if you're using Instagram, I'll just say, if you're using Instagram as your main medical, perspective, and this is me knocking on myself because I get it all the time. Anil, it's wild. Like people DM me, don't know me, and will give me like their whole history and everything. What do I do? I'm like, go see a doctor, man. Like don't write
Yeah.
me on Instagram expecting me to give you a real answer that's going to help you. Even with the knowledge, even if I had everything there, this would not be the platform, and this would not be like a one-on-one. You'd have to go in and really understand a person before answering any question. But unfortunately, we want that simplistic like AI chat GPT, like here's what's wrong, what do I do, and just a outcomes and answer and a solution. And that's unfortunate because I do think we're becoming to like we're getting to this point where we're putting convenience over everything else, and that's just not going to solve the problems we're dealing with as health as a whole, or even optimizing our health. If we do it, in a shortcut way, we're not going to get optimal results.
Oh yeah. No, and it's highly personalized, man, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you don't even start peeling back the layers, right, to even and I think where the quantum association really has a huge effect is our thoughts, words, actions, behaviors, right? Our thoughts. It starts with our thoughts and putting it out there. Like it's just so weird because you kind of seen my evolution over the years, and as a broke medical student to a broke physician, essentially. I'm kidding, but just always investing into education. For me, I'm so thirsty for knowledge. I always seek out that kind of, that thought leader in the space and try to capture, their keen insight, just so that we could push this narrative forward. I just really think that, my key takeaway from all this is our thoughts, words, actions, and behaviors. And I think you got to have fun with it too and not be
mm,
overcritical. And, I'm trying not to curse that much, right? And for me, it's just, and we had a talk offline about this, there's certain, patients that we've seen that come through our practices, our clinics and so forth that we've identified. And it's just like, dude, it really has to deal with your thought process because
yes,
I
yes,
think I gave the example earlier where They're individuals that are super young, highly functional, completely operational, looks amazing, right? Like young and able-bodied, right? But their mentality and their thought process
Mhm.
is so hyper fixated on sickness and illness that it's almost like a learned behavior, right? And then I've got like guys that are really jacked up, right? That are really, really sick and genuinely like cachectic, frail, weak, and so forth. You could see it, but their attitude is so amazing, right? And they're like optimistic, overly optimistic, and they are thriving. Who do I have my money on to heal? The person with the right attitude, the attitude of excellence. And it's just amazing to see, how our thoughts and our words and our actions and our behaviors really shape the environment around us, right? And if there's anything, that we could take away from any of the nonsense that I'm saying that is, essentially medicine is personalized, have fun with it, go into the quantified self, become your own kind of advocate, right? But not overly annoying where you're going to Reddit to learn everything about your decisions in healthcare or Instagram. And then, I do think start connecting your own molecular dots with your quantified self, looking at how we could use wearables and things of that nature to get data and insight with like, okay, I had a glass of wine last night and my sleep score went down. Right. And then because of that, I, woke up a little bit later and that set off a whole pattern of events and chains that maybe have compromised your maximized potential and productivity. Right. So there are all these little things, these cause and effect relationships that influence our behaviors and our actions throughout the day. And if we could get a better understanding and appreciation of, all these different signals and inputs and how it's influencing the way we think, speak, and feel, I think we could use this and leverage it for empowerment, ultimately, right?
Beautifully said, my friend. Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. And I do think so much of it comes down. People are seeking solutions outside of themselves. They're coming to you, they're coming to this center, they're coming to all the wonderful people we've mentioned throughout this podcast, doctors, and saying, heal me. And that's never how it happens. A doctor does not heal. They assist you, they help you, they coach you. They are your biggest supporter at times, but they don't do the healing themselves. That
All right.
needs to change, and it starts in your head. It starts in your mind. It starts with your thoughts, your attitude, everything. So, for anyone listening, it's like that's where it all starts. Everything we talked about, the genetic testing, these amazing, tools, everything we're excited about, none of that matters. And we know this. We've seen
No.
patients go through it, but have that terrible attitude, nothing works on them suddenly
Oh
because
yeah.
that belief
And,
system
and
is
then they're
so
hypersensitive. Sorry.
yes, yes.
They're hypersensitive. I can't even begin to tell you some of the things that I've seen. And it's just like, all right, man, how are you breathing air right now? How are you not reacting to air? And it's just like one of those things that it's just like, and I'm not saying you're not ill, but I
Yeah.
also think the internal processing around your illness makes a huge, influence on your receptivity to cure, right? And again, what I tell people in my practice, I don't want to become your doctor. There's a million doctors around me. I'm in a very rich academic area, clinically, and go talk to them. I want to become your health intelligence partner, right? And
Mm.
for me, I think understanding kind of, how we leverage this information for empowerment is going to be critical because despite me being a board certified family physician and all the additional training in anti-aging and functional medicine and all the things that I do, I just want to have fun with my practice, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like a lot of my patients here privately, I mean, we have fun unpacking stuff
Mm.
and exploring things and having a healthy narrative and conversation around, what I think, detoxing really means, like simple
Yeah.
concepts of
Yeah.
detox, whatever it is, right? I know you've had, people from the Gershon Center on your podcast and,
Mhm.
the people from all these different amazing companies on your podcast. And that's why I love you, Gaspar. You've been like, you are, a true seeker. You are somebody that wants to push the narrative forward. And I really think that when it comes down to it, you're one of my greatest teachers, you and your father,
Mm.
and I can't thank you enough for everything that you do because you're not afraid of having that conversation about like, how does this really work? Why should we use this? How do we infuse this into a therapeutic regimen? Right. And I think that's really important to have a discussion, right? And not be, you know, polarized in our conversation around this, especially kind of everything, the chain of events over the past couple of years and how polarized our country is with things, and it's just like, there is no right answer, man, because your answer is different than my answer, right?
Yes.
Everybody's truth's different,
Yes.
and if you believe that this is going to help you, it's going to help you. If you question if this is going to help you, maybe it's not going to work. Who knows, right? That placebo nocebo effect is really, really powerful, right?
Yeah.
And I just love the work that you're doing. And, I've been following you for years, and I'm just really excited to even have this conversation here with you today because you're just, I think, a innovator in the field and everything that you're doing.
Well, the feeling is mutual. I truly appreciate your words. And I love what you said there, making medicine fun again. That should be the hat. Make medicine fun again, right? Because too many people, there is a level of jadedness within medicine. I think we spoke about this a lot. Like my father has said, like, it used to be respectful, it used to be a collaboration. Now it seems adversarial at times, and that doesn't make it fun. Doctors get into this truly for passion of helping people. But if people don't want to be helped, it becomes very, very challenging. And then you
Yeah,
have this, it's not fun. Healing should be. The whole process should be
that's
a
it.
fun and optimistic, life-giving one, right?
Yeah,
Not the
yeah.
other way around. So I really love that message. And I think we'll finish there, or else this will turn into a Joe Rogan 4-hour podcast. Next thing we know. Dr. Neil, where can people learn more about you, connect with you, maybe make you their health intelligence partner?
So you can find me on Instagram. But no, I am on Instagram. So Dr. Anil Bajnath, Dr. Anil Bajnath. I don't do the posting, my wife does. But I'm going to start getting more active. I'm trying to get on your level with podcasting and all this other fun stuff here. I'm just so
Don't.
busy.
It's too much. You got too much on your hands, man.
And then, so also I'm with the Institute for Human Optimization. This is my private practice. This is my incubator for innovation, where, I kind of pull in all the technologies and leverage this to kind of, center it around a longevity forward practice. So that's ifho.org. I'm here in Maryland. I'm licensed in like almost every state except the shitty ones. I'm kidding. Kidding. Right. So I've got licenses all over the country, see people all over the world. And I just like to have fun, meeting people, hearing their story, their story. Precision medicine begins with your story, right? And how we leverage this for empowerment and just, because you oftentimes, for innovative medicine as well, and your father's practice here, I do think that oftentimes we're the last stop on the train. A
Yeah.
lot of people have been to, a million and one different providers. I've had patients that have been to over 75 different doctors, had
Mm.
all sorts of different things, all sorts of diagnosis, and has not been pointed in the right direction. And then when we start peeling back the layer, especially looking at the environmental piece, it's just like blaring in our face that,
Yes.
again, we live in a toxic environment. I know you speak about the tap water and everything else. And I agree and echo your sentiment that the quality of water and the quality of air and the quality of environment really makes a difference in our ability to heal. And not to mention some of those other environmental factors that are detected using a Lecker instrument for those craters underneath the world, underneath the crust that create these distorted fields in the earth, right? There is a magnetism there, and you should not sleep there, right?
Yeah.
So
Geopathic stress. Yeah.
all those different geopathic stresses, exactly, and its influence on our health is a part of the equation of connecting those molecular dots, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'll chat your ear off all day, man. I'm just really happy to see you and get connected and everything else. But yeah, so I'm with the Institute for Human Optimization, president and founder of the American Board of Precision Medicine, teaching at the university here at GW. We have a really amazing program in integrative medicine, a master's degree certificate, and well, master's degree with certificates in integrative and lifestyle medicine. But yeah, I'm easy to find, a little too easy sometimes. So,
Oh, no, it's in
no,
this day and age, everyone is. And if someone should be, it should be you. You know so much. And I have to say this again. I know I've said it. I truly admire everything. I know this has been a kind of a bromance that we've been doing and this,
yeah, yeah,
but I mean it's true. It's rare, I feel like, in this world to find people that go after the truth, that really put their all into it, stay passionate, keep pushing the envelope. And that's why I truly admire everything you're doing. And thank you so much for coming on and I want to have you back because I know we could go on for hours and people would want to hear that. So let's have you back on when you have a chance.
Yeah, let's do it. It's always a pleasure, my friend. Please tell your parents I said hi.
Oh, I definitely will appreciate you so much, Neil. And
Awesome.
be sure to visit, that's www.ifho.org for more information about Dr. Neil and his services. And until next time, continue writing your own healing story.